roadside assistance. Fortunately, the only surprise here is how little Tabiso pays to insure his Ford EcoSport. What are you waiting for? SMS SAVE to 34473 or call 08600 60,000 now for a quote that may just surprise you.
The women of today are engaged in a new struggle. It is a struggle for equal rights, dignity, economic liberation, and freedom from violence.
On the Watchdog this evening, we speak to some of those women. Advocate Mikateko Maluleke is the Director General of the Department of Women, the department specifically tasked with driving the advancement of gender equality and total emancipation of women. What's her department been up to? She will later be joined by two activists for on-the-ground insights and perspectives. And after that, we speak to the first woman to lead the 148-year-old iconic University of South Africa. Those interviews and more coming up in tonight's Women's Day edition of The Watchdog. President Cyril Ramaphosa says significant strides are being made in the fight against gender-based violence and femicide. He says the economic inclusion of women is also receiving top priority from the government. Delivering his virtual Women's Day message this afternoon, the president released a one-year progress report of the National Strategic Plan he launched last year. But before we get into the detail of what the president says has been achieved, here's a story by our reporter Ntlan Khatlan.
Honoring the role of women, it's been almost 7 decades since South African women took the apartheid regime head-on, cementing their role in the history books of the struggle against the cruel and unforgiving apartheid system. 65 years later, their role still remains. Now continuing to pay tribute, President Ramaphosa called on the modern generation to follow on the footsteps of the class of 1956.
We pay tribute to today's generation of women, just as the women of 1956, who fought against the injustices of their time. The women of today are engaged in a new struggle. It is a struggle for equal rights, dignity, economic liberation, and freedom from violence. Women have always been instrumental in the advancement of the human cause. They have played a crucial role in the struggle for freedom, for justice and equality. And yet it is women who always bear the brunt of inequality, discrimination, marginalization, poverty, and violence.
As the country grappled with the global pandemic, another one persisted: the scourge of gender-based violence. The president says women should be at the forefront of the fight against GBV.
By working together, by refusing to submit, we will achieve true gender equality in our lifetime. If we are to do so, we must eradicate all forms of gender-based violence, violence against women, children, gender non-conforming persons, and members of the LGBTQI+ community.
In the South African calendar, August has been set aside to pay tribute not only to thousands of women who marched in 1956, but to all South African women. Their struggle is not only against gender-based violence, but also being excluded from participating in the economy.
We will soon ratify the International Labour Organization's Convention 190, which addresses sexual harassment and violence in the workplace. Earlier this year, we launched the first phase of the innovative GBVF Private Sector Response Fund. And this fund has to date received about 140 million rand.
The president said government was working hard to ensure that 40% of public procurement goes to women-owned and operated businesses, and a plea for the private sector to also play a role in enhancing the empowerment of women.
I call on businesses, donors, philanthropists, and individuals to contribute to the fund's work.
President Ramaphosa also announced that a Women Economic Assembly will be launched this month to assist women-owned businesses in key economic sectors. Ntlantla Khatlani, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, Advocate Mikateko Maluleke is the Director General of the Department of Women, and she joins us now. Good evening, TG. Thanks very much for your time. I'm going to start with what came at the end, or towards the end of that package, which is the issue of this private sector response fund, which the President said earlier to date has received some 141 million rands in pledges. What is that fund meant for?
The fund is meant to contribute to the eradication of gender-based violence. Mm-hmm. For example, we have a challenge with the forensic evidence. There are not enough forensic laboratories, so that fund could contribute to that. It's an independent fund managed by a board. They can decide where to contribute to, mm-hmm. But I know that they are talking to the police, and they are talking to civil society also to assist civil society organizations, but mostly is to ensure that they assist government to eradicate gender-based violence.
Mm-hmm. And the people from this board, where are they drawn from? Is it very specific types of organizations, or is it just a board like any other, like you would have in a company or something like that?
It's different companies that came together. Mm-hmm. And they selected their own board, okay, and registered a trust.
Mm-hmm. So the government had nothing to do with the composition of that board or even the managing of the affairs of the entity?
No, the president called them, mm-hmm. to contribute, and then they came together. Yes, invited by the president. You remember there was a breakfast, no, it was in the evening, where they committed. However, they are running the board, mm-hmm. and they will decide on, yes, in consultation. They do consult us that we were looking at this. What do you think? But mm-hmm. at the end of the day, they decide where they're going to invest the money, where mm-hmm. they think they will make more meaningful impact.
Mm-hmm. Now, and then as the government, there's been an allocation of approximately 21 billion rand over the next 3 years to support the 6 pillars of the National Strategic Plan that was launched that year. What is that money for? Where does it go? What does it do?
Each government department, and yes, they have a responsibility. It's unlike they allocated the money as a favor. It's something that they were supposed to do. Mm-hmm. However, when they were called to report, some of them were not able to give, facts in terms of this is what we've done. Mm. So then the president called all of them to commit to say, this is how much you are committing on gender-based violence. For example, let me just make an example. Department of Education, both basic education and higher education and training. There's a lot of gender-based violence at schools. You remember now in Vuani, in Venda, a young girl even killed herself because of bullying. So in order to raise awareness, but also to train them, it's going to address gender-based violence at school. I think they had committed 890 million or more than that towards addressing gender-based violence. This budget looks at all the 6 pillars, including the economic cluster. The economic cluster in terms of empowerment of women. Because if women are empowered, women will be able to walk away from the abusive relationships. Women will be able to start their own businesses. However, now they are unemployed. They will run these smaller businesses, informal businesses at the corners, which when COVID-19 came and there was a lockdown, all those businesses just went under. So how is the economic cluster assisting them? So also each department, all government departments had to commit in terms of what they are going to do to empower women, either to eradicate gender-based violence or to empower them. But also, when we talk about gender-based violence in the economic sector, and this is what I talk about always, Vuyo, the economic sector, most of the time, they think it's not their responsibility, it's the criminal justice system responsibility to eradicate gender-based violence. I always talk about Pinky Musia, the lady who was raped and killed under mine in one platinum mine. You remember, I think, a few years back. And when the CEO was asked, he said, my responsibility is to run the mine, it's not to address gender-based violence. But now we're making it very clear that everyone is responsible to address gender-based violence within their area of work. Yes, government has a broader responsibility, but also underground mines, the mines have a responsibility to address that gender-based violence.
Now, the reason this department is located in the presidency is precisely to ensure that these issues are high on the agenda, and as you say, everyone takes a responsibility for advancing this agenda. How then do you ensure as a department that what the other departments give you is not just numbers, but actually this money goes where it is supposed to go? Whose job is it to then monitor very closely, track the monies and ensure that the money actually goes where it is supposed to go?
It's our responsibility. However, since we are a small department, so we bring in those people who have capabilities. We work with National Treasury because National Treasury is the one that is responsible for government's budget. So National Treasury now is assisting us to track whether government departments are using that money or not. Because there was a time where there was a 1.7 billion commitment during the emergency relief, where we couldn't tell who committed what, who didn't commit what, but the National Treasury was able to track it. So now we bring in the National Treasury. However, also the President required us to submit weekly reports on the implementation of the commitments that government had done. But the weekly report was a challenge because some government departments would then submit the same report twice. Then it doesn't help. So now the President allowed us that we submit, we collect monthly, or we submit a monthly report. So we monitor, we get the information we submit. And the information that we've been submitting to the President on a monthly basis is the information that informed the report. And the department also works with civil society organizations because we have collaborative initiatives where civil society works with government. They are the ones also that are monitoring. So the information that informs this report also comes from the collaborative initiatives.
Now, from the information you've received so far, whether it was from the weekly reports earlier and now monthly reports. Now, with the government announcing last year that 40% of public procurement would go to women or women-owned or women-operated businesses. On the basis of what you know from the reports you have received so far, how far are we in meeting those targets, that target?
Government department, besides the 40%, any other percentage, government departments have not done that well in terms of empowering women. Now with the 40%, what we are doing as a department, we are meeting with each department. For example, now we're meeting with the Department of Housing, because what we want them to do, we want them to establish women's panels, women-constituted panels, where if there's a tender, 40% of whatever that tender must go to those women. Those women will organize themselves in such a way that those that are able to get the tender, they will follow the correct procedures of tenders, but that 40% will go to the panel that has been established, or the panel will adjudicate on the 40% procurement that goes to women. I think that will be the only way that will be able to implement that. Because now some departments will tell you that we've advertised, but women do not apply. How do you just advertise? You need to communicate with women in a certain way. Women have got organizations and associations. After you've advertised, how do you then send those documents to women's organizations? Or, for example, the women in construction, why don't you send that to women in women in infrastructure website, so that they are able to see and know that, and be able to comply with the deadlines? You know what women say? They say sometimes we see the advert after the compulsory briefing session has passed, or after the tender is closed. So we are saying find a way of communicating with women so that women can participate, because people have to, or government officials have to deliberately make sure that they pursue women so that women can benefit. Women constitute more than 50% of the population of South Africa. So if we empower them, the economy of South Africa will grow. This is what we say as the Department of Women.
Yeah, I mean, if government departments aren't doing this, one can only imagine what the private sector's responses would be, because I mean you should be leading by example as government departments. But I want us to move on to the justice cluster. The president saying he's proud of the fact that there have been important legal reform over the past a couple of years, key legislation around domestic violence, bail and sentencing of offenders. The courts are handing down harsh penalties and sentences to those found guilty of gender-based violence. Are you, happy with the progress made on that front?
Yes and no. Yes, as the president said, that there are harsher sentences. There are courts, there are magistrates, there are prosecutors that will make sure that they prosecute. But there are other cases that would take long, a rape case which would be delayed because of forensic evidence. There's a delay, there's a backlog, there's a serious backlog. And as far as I'm concerned, it denies women access to justice, because some of those people who are the perpetrators, they end up perpetrating against other victims. If they were arrested and convicted on time, maybe they wouldn't have perpetrated on other victims. But also some, they even kill the very same victim who has reported. You remember, I think 2 months back or something like that in the Eastern Cape, there's a young woman that they showed that she was killed by. So that's why I'm saying yes and no, because yes, there are those that are doing very well. There are, court officials and judges who are not going to take, things lying, but sometimes the system itself, it delays justice towards others.
Talk to us about, the training of officers and other people in understanding, this work. The people who have, the president says about 3,500 officers have received specialized training. Has that made a difference?
I think you have 200,000 police officers. I think you have about maybe 70,000 or more investigating officers. So yes, we are happy about 3,000, but it is not enough.
The president mentioning also, sexual assault evidence kit, and those things prioritized at police stations from what you know.
Yes, because of, let me tell you, civil society organization marching to the president that time has really helped in many instances, because they highlighted some of the challenges that they had in terms of accessing justice, and because it just put the limelight on all these challenges. Then again, I would say most of the police stations have them. It might be possible that someone went to one of the police stations and don't get those kits, but I know that they are procuring them, and that is one of the things that the private sector fund also was going to look at, to ensure that in each and every police station there is or there are the rape kits. And because it's not just about the rape kits, it's rape kits, and then when they are sent to the forensic labs, that they are processed.
DJ, I'm going to ask you to stay on for a bit, because I just want us to bring a couple of people who have on the ground insights and perspectives on these matters as well. I'm going to bring in Lisa Vetten and Nonhlanhla Skosana from Sonke Justice. Lisa, if I may bring you in here, the role of the criminal justice system that we're talking about with the DG just now. Just from where you sit, what are you seeing? Lisa?
I think something very uneven. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I think what we're seeing is something very uneven. So, for example, you hear what is being said, you see these attempts being made to improve the system through the Domestic Violence Act, but on a day-to-day basis, things look pretty much the same. And I think there's often an emphasis on the wrong kinds of things. So, we have been putting in place minimum sentencing legislation since 1997, but that is not the problem. The problem is the fact that, at best, 8% of rapes which are reported result in conviction. So minimum sentence is coming right at the end, when we've already lost 92% of cases. So we're not looking at where the problems are, which are in the quality of policing. And again, I'm not convinced by training. We have been training the police, and I can speak here personally, since 1996. So what I want to know is what is different about this training this time to make a difference. What I'm also concerned about is the fact that if we look at the police, for instance, and we look at domestic violence, if the police fail to, they have a range of duties of the Domestic Violence Act. And if they fail to comply with these, then it is misconduct and disciplinary action should be taken against them. However, we've seen quite a lot of reports recently about how discipline generally has fallen apart in the police, including in relation to where police officers have killed people. So if discipline has so fallen apart, what does that mean for the way in which they're dealing with domestic violence and how well they're dealing with it? And I think for those of us who try to get the police to come to meetings in order to find out what's happening, they just don't cooperate. So I think there is what's being told possibly to the Department of Women, what's being written on paper, but that is quite different from the reality, unfortunately.
DG, do you want to come in?
I think I am not going to dispute what Lisa is saying. I know that when you go, that's why I said you go to some of the courts, you find that they're doing a good job. You go to others, things are falling apart. Even with the police stations where when you go, but also I think what's important, we need to take steps back to say what exactly would you be requiring when you go to court, when you go to the police station? If you go to the police station, because some of the people would go and want a protection order. You definitely can't get a protection order in the magistrate. You must get it at the court. However, the challenge that we have, and even as a department, we used to raise it with the police, that somebody goes bleeding and they say, I have been assaulted by my husband. then the police would then say, go to court for a protection order. That is not an issue of a protection order. That victim will go to the court to get a protection after, but this is assault GBH. They must be arrested. And I know that there are police stations that arrest, and there are some that do not arrest. I think for us as a department at the national office, you are correct when you said people who are at the ground, they see things that we may not see. Hence, we also have a collaborative initiative with civil society and private sector and the labor movement, so that we can be able to hear also the challenges that are happening in courts or at the police stations.
Let's bring in
Nonhlanhla. One of the pillars.
Okay. Continue, DJ.
One of the pillars of the NSP, pillar one, is accountability. That pillar is because we know people do whatever they do. Sometimes as if they're running their spaza shop and yet they are employed. So we are saying each sector, whether it's the police or justice or whatever, must up its game on disciplinary. It must have standard operating procedures. It must have procedures in order to discipline people who don't comply. There has to be accountability.
Nonhlanhla, do you want to come in?
I just want to also, support what Lisa is saying, but over and above beyond that, we're working in Diepkloof with a Diepkloof police station. The challenge with the police station is issue around human resource. The number of police officers in that police station versus the cases that they are supposed to deal with versus the population that they are supposed to deal with, it is really concerning because they are so understaffed. And as they are understaffed, also the challenge is their attitude. They are receiving numerous trainings, but we don't see change in how they engage with the survivors on the ground. So there is a real concern around that. And we are calling upon the Minister of Police to go to the Diepkloof police station and look at that police station, but also go to the Protea court. That court, initially, it was not meant to be a court, it was a school. And then in a case where there is a case that needs to continue there is an element of secondary victimization of the survivors because they have to, have this encounter with the very same perpetrator in a very awkward way. So our justice system needs to work on those issues. So those are the issues that we are raising at the moment and say, let the subs go and look at what is happening at the Diepkloof police station. And we are available as Sonke Gender Justice, working under emancipation network to work together with them. Also, going with them to the Protea court and go and look at the situation at the Protea court. We are available to work together with them and make sure that that space changes.
Okay. DJ, the issue of resources, but also secondary victimization, is that getting priority?
Resources, I think that not only the police, hospitals, we were worried, we were so worried that if they were to close clinics and some of the hospitals by the Department of Health, we will be in serious trouble. That South Africa has a serious challenge economically. So they are cutting the budgets of entire government departments. We are one department which gets absolutely nothing, but our budget has been cut even further. So that is the biggest challenge. I think the cuts make certain posts to be frozen rather than being filled. And I'm not sure how the department or SABC will deal with it, but I think the people who have to assist SABC and other critical departments is National Treasury. So I'm just saying, one day, Vuyo, you need to invite National Treasury to ask them in terms of the budget cuts. Until 2024, the budget cuts are going to be even worse. Last year, this year, it's worse than last year. Next budget year, it's going to be worse than this year, just like that until 2024, so that they can stabilize the economy of the country.
Lisa, how do we move forward and close the gap between what is being said, the commitments that are being made, and what actually happens, on the ground. How do we close this gap?
We need to do a couple of things, and I want to just pick up here from the DG. The first is that if we say that gender-based violence is a priority, then this needs to be reflected in our budgeting. So we actually need to see government sitting down and saying, we think these things are priorities and we are going to ring fence or give conditional grants that protect these funds, and this is what they must be used for. I'm just going to give you an example in the Eastern Cape. The DG spoke about budget cuts. Services there, from domestic violence through to children's homes, through to older person services, 56 million rand got cut off those services in order to pay government employees' salaries. So I think we need to have a very hard conversation here as to what is it that government actually prioritizes and what is it that it thinks is important and who is going to feel the pain and the loss of services because of the economic state that we're in. So that's number one, is some hard choices and some very explicit statements on what it is we are going to prioritize and where we're going to put our money. I think also as a sector, we possibly need to be doing some very careful thinking about, given the current state of the economy, what is it that we think ought to be government's priority right now, because that national strategic plan is a comprehensive one and it's a large one. It has many activities listed in them. I'm not sure we can tackle them all under the current circumstances. So I think we need to make some of those hard choices in relation to policy if we're going to close those gaps, and I think rather do a few things really well that will have an impact rather than spreading very thinly, trying to do a little bit of everything, spread little bits of money here, there and everywhere, and ultimately have not enough impact. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the sorts of discussions that we need to be having.
Mm-hmm. DG, I mean, when Treasury comes, and slashes budgets, are those conversations, preceded by are those decisions, rather, preceded by conversations about what is important, before, they actually do the cutting? Or do you, as the rest of the departments, just have to take Treasury's word for it? In other words, Treasury comes and says, I'm slashing your budget, yours is to accept without any conversation? Please unmute yourself.
Let me just give context.
Okay, we can hear you now.
You remember our economy, we were even downgraded a few times, but also COVID-19 came. South Africa had not budgeted for something like that. So some of the budgets had to be cut. There were discussions about that, but in terms of how much or whose budget is being cut, that's where they'll decide, because everybody, if we were to decide, I would say our department is the smallest and it doesn't get a big budget, so don't cut our budget. But when you look at other critical, because let me tell you, your social development, which is responsible for the grants, also it received some cuts of the budget. So I think it was just, they were between the rock and the sea. And I am not blaming them, because the situation required them to cut the budgets in order for us to fund the COVID-19 and also to give grants to people who needed assistance, and to give grants to businesses and all those. So those are some of the challenges. That what is priority? Yes, gender-based violence is priority, and then there are other priorities. Health is priority. Grants, people must eat, because now we have hunger. We have a problem of hunger. People need to eat. People need to be given at least money to be able to go and look for a job. So there are competing priorities. And I'm not saying gender-based violence is not a priority. Gender-based violence is a priority, because even we ourselves, doesn't matter whether you are employed or whatever, you can be subjected to gender-based violence. You can be hijacked, you can be raped, so many things can happen. But at the same time, someone could get ill and need to go to hospital, and they need a service at the hospital. I think that is the challenge that we have.
Nonhlanhla, what needs to be done?
Yeah, it is quite concerning. This discussion, it really raises a lot of concerns, because when the civil society organization started this process of developing the NSP, one of the things that was key to us is to have a costed and funded NSP. And that is what we advocated for. And the issue that, they had to go around and look for funds in different departments, that really shows the issue around commitment, because now it comes across as a lip service. And when we are in this platform and survivors of gender-based violence are listening to this conversation, they are really losing hope, and they feel that the state is failing them. So it is very important, I think, for government, civil society organizations, and the private sector to go back to the drawing board and really make sure that we have a very fixed kind of a plan that is fully budgeted and funded, so that you can make sure that we really deal with the issue of gender-based violence. And when you look at this report, it is quite concerning that they're also highlighting the fact that in this report, most of the activities that are reported are government, interventions. The civil society contributions, they are not well, kind of captured in this report. So I think we really need to go back to our steering committees where we meet and engage on this NSP and make sure that we do justice to the NSP. But also it is not about the document or the issue of compliance from the government side. It is about the woman in Deep Sloot who's been killed or raped, anywhere else in South Africa. Those are elderly women in the Eastern Cape. It's about them. It's not about us being able to comply and make sure that we report to the development partners. But it is about human beings who are losing their life on a day-to-day basis. So it is quite concerning when I'm listening to the DG and how we talk around issues of budget and the commitment around making sure that this NSP it comes to life.
Okay, DG, before I release you. The President today said you'll soon be ratifying the International Labour Organization's Convention 190, which he said addresses sexual harassment and violence in the workplace. Just tell us about the importance of that.
Before I respond to that, allow me to respond to the contribution of civil society organizations.
Okay. Yes, go ahead, Didi.
You see, the challenge with civil society organizations is that they are not coordinated. They do not have a body, an umbrella body. So sometimes it is difficult for themselves to coordinate and give a report that represents their contribution, their total contribution. So it would be individuals maybe that are submitting the contribution. Unlike labor has got umbrella bodies that represent them. Private sector, they would have their coordinator, they would have bodies that represent them. With civil society is individual civil society that participate even in the collaborative initiatives. So I think also civil society must take responsibility somewhere. On the ILO, I think it is critical, and what I like is that the labor movement is the one that is even pushing it. It looks at gender-based violence and sexual harassment at the workplace. Earlier on when I spoke about Pinky, and Pinky is not the only one. There are many women who have been raped and killed underground. So there is gender-based violence at the workplace. And also there is sexual harassment where when young women work, in order for them to be able to get promotion, they would have to, give favors. Sometimes even if they've been abused, they can't report because this is the supervisor that they report to, or this is the head of the division, so they can't go anywhere. Either they need to leave the employment because they can't report, or if they don't want to give in, they want to leave the employment. So I think this is critical because it compels each company, including even government, though government has the sexual harassment policies, to have a sexual harassment policy and to address gender-based violence.
Okay, Richard, we've got to release you there. Thanks very much for being part of this conversation. But Lisa is going to stay on for a bit together with Nonhlanhla. Thanks very much for coming through. But if I may come back to you, Lisa, I mean, going forward, I want us to talk also about the shelters that have been built around. Are those working?
You know, again, and to sound like a stuck record, we go back to issues of budget. And none of these problems are new. The under-budgeting of social services, predominantly provided by NGOs, dates back to at least 2000. There have been complaints about this. And I think what I find concerning is that one of the target activities identified by the National Strategic Plan was the identification of a core set of services addressing gender-based violence as well as their costing, and that included shelters. That was submitted last year in September to the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation. Here we are in August, and from what I can gather, Cabinet has still not approved that document, despite the fact that this was set as something that should have been completed within the first year of the NSP. So I think we have a problem here in that what is it that gets done? How do we choose what gets done? Because it would make an enormous difference for women to have services that are properly costed, that are effective. Because you cannot be effective as a service if you don't even have enough money to buy food for those who stay in your shelter. If you are not able to employ a social worker who is skilled in work with children, who can run programs so that we can disrupt intergenerational cycles of violence. So I think shelters do the best they can, but they do so in the face of great struggles. You also sit, just with another problem in that the Department of Social Development says they don't maintain or look after shelters. That is not their responsibility. And then you have the Department of Public Works saying, we don't pay or look after buildings that don't belong to the state. So you have situations, for example, under the lockdown, where you had shelters that couldn't be used because part of them had burnt down at the start of the lockdown. In other situations, the roofs had collapsed. Nobody was doing anything to repair that. There are other parts of the country where shelters have been closed now for over a year because there was just no funding to repair them. So you have what is supposedly an essential service not being given the kind of attention and maintenance that it needs in order to be able to function effectively. So I think it's here where we really test government's commitment to doing something about the problem, is how do we make that translation from what is clearly commitment from, I think, high-level officials, but how is that translating into everyday decisions being made by those at district and regional level around how they should use their money? And what guidance are they getting around what they should cut and what they should deprioritize? And that I'm not seeing.
Okay. Nonhlanhla, quick last word from you.
Thank you so much, Bill. I just want to say, as a civil society organizations, we are very structured, very organized, because the very same NSP, it was developed by the civil society organization. The shadow framework was developed by the civil society organization. The 24 demands were developed by the civil society organization. The call for the Gender Summit, it was led by the civil society organization. So it's very important to note that. But what is more important for us as civil society organization is to make sure that South Africa is a safe space for children, for women, for non-gender conforming people, for the LGBTI community, and that it is possible when we can get full commitment from the government, from the treasury, and have this MSP costed and funded fully, clearly, and we know that each and every activity is funded, and then we will be able to achieve to end gender-based violence in our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you, Nonhlanhla Skhosana from Sonke Gender Justice and Lisa Vetten, an activist. After the break, we'll speak to the first woman to lead the 148-year-old iconic University of South Africa.
We want to live in a society where women feel safe and are indeed safe. We want to live in a society where women are able to assume leadership positions in the workplace, in the community, in government, and in all public institutions. We also want to live in a society where women's opportunities are not limited by social attitudes and practices, or even by economic circumstances of women. We want to live in a society where every girl child can study what she wants to study and for as long as she needs to, and where she can take up any occupation or pursue any career of her choice.
And our next guest, Professor Puleng Linkabula, has done exactly that. She is the first woman to lead the University of South Africa in 148 years. Good evening, Prof. Thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, Buyo. I'm delighted and thank you for inviting me. I wish you a happy Women's Day and all other women in your life and in South Africa, in the continent.
Thank you very much, Prof. So, how has it been?
It has been quite wonderful to joining UNISA, particularly because UNISA is one of those universities that spawned open distance learning in the world. And the context of COVID-19 as that which grounded my joining the University of South Africa helped us to ensuring that we accelerate open distance e-learning, but we also share the lessons with other universities as well as technical, vocational and training colleges, because UNISA, because of its sheer size, complexity, but also its historical legacies, must ensure that it does not become the only site of excellence, but holds the higher education system and the innovation system as a partner in its envisioning of the future.
Now, you rejoined an institution that you were part of, previously. How was it this time around, or how different was it, when you found it now? How different was it from the institution you were part of years earlier?
Thank you very much. There are multiplicities of transformations that have taken place at UNISA, but there are also areas of development that we need to pay attention to. So I worked at UNISA since 1999 as a part-time lecturer and followed up until I was an associate professor, a director, and also the Dean of Student Affairs within UNISA. But when I go back, when I joined on the 5th of January, it was as a Vice Chancellor who has to ensure that I work with the collective UNISA management team, the deans of the colleges, students, staff, and alumni to ensure that the university continues its academic agenda. The other challenge or opportunity I would state is that the tendency to treating women versus men as vice chancellors or leaders, there are clearer dynamics. So, for instance, one young man from ICT came into my office and said, "Hello, Sisi." And then I said, "Would you have said that to a male vice chancellor?" And he says, "I apologize." So we contend with being rendered diminutive, even though our competencies, qualifications, experience, but also the leadership of complex institutions such as UNISA, even though we may have the competencies and experiences. And this is largely because of institutionalized discrimination and prejudice against women, but also patriarchal hierarchy. This idea that only men are the vessels of wisdom, knowledge, leadership, and competencies, something which, as women leaders, we must contend and contest without necessarily buying into the same leadership molds of dominating, of undermining, or of not recognizing the humanity or dignity of colleagues, students, stakeholders of the university.
Now, when you look at the array of universities that we have in the country, what do you see as the one thing that UNISA has, or the one thing that UNISA is uniquely poised to do when you look at it against every other university that we have in the country?
Thank you very much, Vio. I've had the opportunity of working at UNISA as an open distance e-learning university. I've also had the opportunity of working at University of Toronto, Wits University, the University of the Free State. The one unique aspect that UNISA has to offer is the viability of making higher education accessible to multiplicities and large numbers of students at university. So the challenge that we have as South Africa, wherein 4 million young people have lost hope in finding a job, we could be that lever of expanding access to higher education, particularly in the context of digitalization and the 4.0 industrialization or fourth industrial revolution. We must see UNISA as one side of enabling the massification of higher education and for ensuring that youth and young adults in South Africa see higher education as a lever of transforming their own lives, and particularly women who in the main have been marginalized from political, economic participation, in spite of the fact that majority of them attempt to pursue higher education for their own degrees or for their own edification in particular disciplines.
Now, obviously, to be able to do all those things, you need to be getting support. And when I say you, not only UNISA, but all higher learning institutions need the support, of the government in particular in bringing through these young people so that by the time they should be joining higher learning institutions, they are indeed ready, or it is relatively easier for them to really make use of the opportunities that are being created. What can you say about the schooling system in particular as a feeder?
Vuyo, we must also be, as South Africans, be attentive to the fact that our higher education system, but also basic education system, has been stratified in ways that enable at least those who are from middle income families to generally acquiring education that's comparable to the best education anywhere in the world. But we also have the public basic education fraught with multiplicities of contradictions, where in the rural areas sometimes the access to subjects that enable youth and young adults to moving into higher education systems, whether universities or TVET colleges, sometimes become an impediment. And it is my commitment and UNISA's commitment to ensuring that we work with all levers of education, basic education, technical and vocational education, and higher education with partnerships, so that we try to mediate on those areas that South Africa is lagging behind when compared to economies or countries with similar economies. You would know that the World Economic Forum, for instance, has ranked us quite low on the acquisition of mathematics, science, and technical subjects such as those. And UNISA, being one of the universities that produces half of the teachers in the country, a third of chartered accountants in the country, exciting work on nanotechnologies through CSET, our colleges of science and technology. We have decided that it will not be constructive for us thinking around universities in the future, that we just think about ourselves, but we ensure that we have strong partnerships with these levers, including universities outside the country. We're the only university in South Africa that has a campus outside the country in Ethiopia. And that's because we are committed to ensuring that not only South Africa's youth and young adults, people like myself, middle age, are able to acquire university education, and the continent also benefits from the quality of higher education that UNISA proffers.
Prof, thank you so much for your time this evening. Professor Puleng Lenkabula, who is, of course, the first woman to lead UNISA in its 148-year history. And that's what we're going to leave it this evening. To join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.